Okay, so that's going ahead. Okay, so I'm starting the event now. Fantastic. Are you there, Jake?
I'm here.
Ah, look at that. Oh my gosh, you get like double brownie points. We usually have at least 10 minutes of a few issues. So you've done extremely well. So thanks so much, Jake. So welcome. We'll just let everyone start chipping in and joining. We are actually live on YouTube as well. And so that is under Emma Howitt Pure Abodes. And I'm really excited to have Jake on with us. And we are going to be talking about breaking free from stress in your property journey. So please do, guys, I will now as well, please do ping 6 people who you think could really do with some help and support with, you know, day-to-day stresses that you might have in your property business. As we know, it is so easy to have issues crop up, and quite often, no matter what kind of business you're in, they may crop up, but inherently we are here talking about how it may affect us in our property business. So I have just pinged some people, so yeah, guys, if you wouldn't mind pinging some as well, that would be amazing. So Jake, let's just jump off, because not everyone's going to know you, obviously. So if you wouldn't mind just giving yourself a quick introduction before we start jumping into the content here.
Okay. Thanks, Emma. So I'm Jake Nadir. I work at Stress Executive as a hypnotherapist. I spent 23 years in the corporate world, working predominantly in the project area, IT, project management specifically. As time went by, my projects got bigger and bigger. Stress caught up with me because I didn't know kind of what it was, what to do with it, how to cope. I was just kind of shooting from the hip. But at some point, you know, in the 23rd year, it caught up to me. And because I didn't know what to do, I bailed as a result of stress, and then turned to, you know, looking for a solution for it.
Wowee. So it really is, because I mean, I suspect some of us experience, you know, stress where you might feel a bit nervous. You might, you know, be thinking, oh, I can't do it. But then you potentially do it. But this sounds like there's also stress, isn't there, that can be absolutely debilitating. It completely can take over your life. You know, I always imagine, because it's such a recent event, when you think about COVID, I think I have quite a high level of coping with stress. But I remember thinking I'm really on the edge in those early days, not because I was worried about my health. I wasn't worried about that at all, but I was worried about my team, keeping them in a job, keeping everyone else's family fed. And that felt like an enormous responsibility for me. And I did think, wow, I'm pretty good at coping with this, and I'm going to keep going. I know I can do it, but I know there would be others who this would be totally overwhelming. So where do you think there's a line between this kind of stress where we kind of
coping and not coping?
Yeah, it's almost, sometimes I don't think, you know, a little bit of stress, a little bit of nervousness is kind of, you know, is good. But then yes, where is that tipping point, do you think?
So you hit the nail on the head a moment ago when you were talking about worries. You know, and it doesn't matter what that worry is. You weren't worried about your health, but you had other worries. It doesn't matter what the worry is. See, every single time we have a worry, it's a negative thought. Our body produces stress hormones. That stress hormones is what we feel as stress. Now, if you imagine a stress bucket, right? Use this analogy of a stress bucket. When it's nice and empty, We don't have a lot of stress hormones in the body. We feel okay. We're in the rest and digest nervous system. We got plenty of time to do things. We're nice and relaxed. And every time you have a little worry, your body puts a little bit of more adrenaline, a little bit more cortisol into that bucket. And you're okay until you get to about the halfway mark. When you reach the halfway mark, a little alarm bell goes off and you switch nervous systems. You switch from rest and digest into your fight and flight nervous system. And you start feeling a little bit stressed, but it's still comfortable. You know, you're feeling a little bit stressed. It's the kind of stress that keeps you sharp and on your toes. The one you mentioned, that's good, because the right amount of stress is absolutely crucial for our survival, right? So it keeps you sharp and focused, and it's absolutely necessary. But the more worries you have, the more worries you have, the more worries you have, the bucket gets fuller and fuller. Your tolerance starts getting exceeded for adrenaline and cortisol. And then you start feeling a little bit stressed. Then you start feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So really that line is, how many worried thoughts are you having? And every time you have a worried thought, it's putting in there. And we have a couple of coping mechanisms. You mentioned that. So every night when we sleep, the body naturally empties adrenaline and cortisol from your body. So rapid eye movement will do that. Meditation will do that. Going out for a walk will do that. Exercise will do that. There's a number of things we can do to cope with the level of adrenaline and cortisol in our body. And as long as you're draining it faster than it's filling, you're managing. And you mentioned that even you that has a good tolerance for stress and good coping mechanisms, you found yourself at the point where you were wondering, which way is it going to go? But what you managed to do is you managed to reduce the number of negative thoughts that you were having. So when you worry less, when you find ways to have fewer negative thoughts, and then you're sleeping, you're exercising, you're meditating, you're doing those things, then it's going out faster than in, then you're coping. So that line really is basically, when it's coming in faster than it's going out, you're going to get fuller until you're feeling overwhelmed, and then you actually overflow. And that's where I found myself, right? I found myself at the overflow point. And the interesting thing about adrenaline and cortisol is we have an intellectual mind and we have a subconscious mind. Our intellectual mind, when we're not stressed, we've got full access to our intellectual mind. But the fuller that bucket gets, the less access you have to your intellectual mind. And that's what tripped me up in the end. I had so many negative thoughts going on. My bucket was so full of adrenaline and cortisol, I was overwhelmed and unable to think clearly. The tiniest little things were tripping me up. Things that were easy yesterday, suddenly they weren't. And that's just a symptom of stress. That's just how it works.
Yeah, so it's basically, isn't it? It's kind of like that reality versus actual. And you'll have some people, won't you? So like even like your children or whatever it is, they'll see something. So, certainly when I'm coaching, new property investors, some of them literally just seem to fly. They might have loads of things going on. They might have kids, a job. I've got, one particular one. I know she's a nurse. She works crazy hours, all of these kind of things, but still just keeps going, really. And I'm not saying that there's no worries there. Definitely is open to talking about the concerns, but just keeps kind of taking action. Where there are other people that just seem to be completely halted by stuff. And also it's kind of like when you're talking to people, for some, I might make some recommendations of, so I talk about hacks. So recently I've been talking about, rent to rent hacks. And there's this 3 pages of, and one of them is, drawing a load of no's and then crossing them out when you get a no, and being excited about it, because it's kind of reframing, isn't it? But where is it? Do you think we all naturally have a different level of what we cope with? We naturally respond differently, or is it the time of our lives, or where do you think that's at?
There's a host of factors that influence us, and it's not so much that one person can cope better than another. It's what are you doing with the world that you're interacting with? You know, for some people, a worry is water off the duck's back. They don't think of that thing again. So limited amount of adrenaline or cortisol goes into the body. But for somebody else, they'll take that thing, that same thing, and they'll hold on to it. And that thought will go around and around and around. And every single time that negative thought goes down, it puts more stress into the bucket. So essentially, the difference between one person and another is how many negative thoughts are you entertaining given what's busy happening in the world? Because that's where the choice happens, right? The world happens to us. The choice is how we respond. And if you're responding with negativity and you're, ruminating, going around and around and around, that's the person that's going to be stuck, really, really struggling. Whereas your nurse, who's got this busy, busy life and she just gets on with it, the world happens to her and she chooses to reframe, probably, so that that negative thing doesn't look so negative. She might, one typical really good technique is to look for the silver lining when life happens. And if you're looking for the silver lining and you acknowledge, look, this is pretty rough, this situation, and this is hard to cope with, but here's the silver lining. Let me acknowledge the situation, but let me focus on the silver lining. And then you're reframing that.
And do you think that, so part of it, so obviously is, for some it's a reality, for some it's just thought process, maybe even passing thought process, and for other it's natural. And I know when I was quite early on in my property journey, it really was much more what I would call stressful for me. There was a lot of waking up at 3 a.m. and suddenly somebody mentioned this the other day and said the 3 a.m. whiskey run or something, and I was like, oh, I wish I'd known that. I didn't know that people did that. But and you lie there just ruminating, this constant kind of things racing through your head, and of course there are things that can be done. You're told to write everything down, but even then it's kind of waking up with that kind of, for me, everything's in my stomach, so it's almost like that, and I feel sick. And even though you believe that there is there is a solution for it, you still kind of are sitting in that sort of dire strait, I suppose. So just to understand, so how is that as with regards to stress and anxiety? One, are they the same things? Is that just different wording for it? Is it a synonym? We did that in my daughter's my daughter's spelling this morning.
So just to circle back very quickly, that kind of feeling you experience, right? When you're going through something for the first time, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of learning. And once you've been through something, once you've repeated something a few times, you kind of know what to expect, right? So in your early days, you had a lot of worries because there's a lot of unknowns, right? And you're probably taking some risks and. So that doesn't affect you so much anymore because you've been through that cycle. You've learned that there's some stuff you don't need to worry about. But now stress and anxiety, they're different, but we kind of treat them the same. Stressors are things in the world happening to you. That's life happening to you. Stressors is stuff happening. Stress or anxiety is your response to the stressors. It's your response to life happening to you. And essentially what it is life happens. You think something negative, you feel something negative, that feeling triggers stress hormones to be produced. And that's the moment that you feel stressed. And it might feel nice and sharp, you're focused, or it might be stressed or overwhelmed or overflowing, depends on how much there is. But really that feeling of stress that we have, that's what the adrenaline and cortisol hormones feel like.
Yeah.
And we only get them when we're responding negatively to the world, because every negative response is an instruction to produce more of that hormone.
And so what I see is a lot of people coming into property, they might have a job that generally they probably don't necessarily enjoy. That's usually the case. They kind of want to get out of it. They can be comfortable, which I think is a dangerous position to be in. But suddenly they've got their job which usually comes with a certain number of, as you say, stresses and potential anxieties. Then they potentially invest a really quite substantial amount of money to educate themselves, to then move into this property world. And obviously in property, we're not talking small numbers. It's not like going and buying a bar of chocolate. You're buying things that inherently you should be getting a university degree to spend that kind of money, shouldn't you, really? And so they've got an awful lot of stuff going on here. How might that play out? What do you see for somebody in that situation, especially those perhaps that really been really excited, they've bought into the dream, which definitely is not just a dream, is a reality for an awful lot of people. But you're also going to have a certain number of people that it remains a dream because they never managed to get over, whether it's the stress or the action. What do you see in that kind of these scenarios?
There's a lot to unpack there. So I guess for a lot of people that we're talking about here that are in work and they've decided to change to do this other thing, usually you invite change because you're trying to change the way you feel, right? Or you're for whatever reason they get there. There's uncertainty for a lot of people, right? So you might already be a little bit stressed, a little bit, you might be struggling to cope a little bit. You bring in this change, now you spend a whole bunch of money, and that will cause you some things to worry about, right? And there's uncertainty. And the interesting thing is about our feelings, right? Our thoughts are completely agnostic of feelings. Thoughts have no feelings until we reach into the future or into the past and we place some feeling on that, some expectation of an outcome. So if we're worried about something, we're going to be thinking, am I risking too much? Is this ever going to work? You might be thinking all kinds of stuff. So taking this on can add to your stress levels. Now, a lot of people turn up at my door because they've been tripping themselves up. They've been getting in their own way for so long that it's become an issue. And after we talk for a little while, we realize that, there's actually not a hell of a lot to fix here. Although you might be feeling overwhelmed, although you might be feeling like you're overflowing, as though the world's going to end, as though you're really, really struggling to use your brain, your intellectual mind, because things feel that bad. Very often there's very little to fix, but to remove trip hazards, to, a lot of people in that position, usually they're not eating properly. Usually they're not sleeping properly. Usually they're not getting any exercise. Usually they're not spending time with people that they like, love, and trust. Usually they'll be on the hamster wheel. They're never getting off that thing. They're exhausted. So for a lot of people, most of my clients, the first thing we do is we get stress levels down. We take a look at the situation, bring the stress levels down, because very often, once you get the stress levels down to a comfortable place, you've gotten out of your own way and you're sleeping better, you're feeling better, you've got energy, you're positively motivated. And then you can deal with whatever's in front of you. It's just that place where I was when I left the corporate world. I couldn't do the simplest thing because my stress levels were so high. It was interfering with my intellectual mind. And, it's easy to get to that place, but not difficult to, come out of that place if you know what to do and what to look for and how to go about that.
And so what might, sorry.
It feels because it feels so strong, you think it's going to take a long time or be really hard to fix. But actually, you go in there, you identify the stress taps, you turn them off, then you sleep, then you exercise, then you rest, then you meditate. And before long, it's all good.
Wow. Well, that's hopeful, isn't it? So for anyone who is, in that moment where they're feeling, for me, it's this real sick feeling and almost shortness of breath. It's kind of like, oh, I'm so kind of concerned about that thing. That's so what are the signs that we might look out for with somebody who, even people who are far down the line with their property career as well? You can have things crop up. So I know that a lot of people at the moment, especially those who've done big developments, they might have really big houses and they're not moving as quickly as they might want to. So that's a huge amount of investment that's been put in, and then suddenly they're not in the financial position that they thought they would be. So
the starting point is always having an awareness of what's going on. You have to look in and see what's going on, see why. So once you're aware of how you're feeling, I'm just talking plain old feelings, right? Once you're aware of how you're feeling, then you can look towards, why am I feeling that way? But very, very precious few of us ever do that. We never look at, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling? We just look at what needs to be done next. What needs to be done next? So we don't go and resolve, empty the stress bucket first. We just keep piling more into it. And we get to the point where we lose or have a restricted access to our intellectual mind, right? So the first step is just being aware. How do I feel? And if you're asking yourself, if you're behaving strangely, if you're having physical symptoms, if you're having twitches. I had one client came to me, had difficulty walking. He had such a bad twitch in one leg. He had great difficulty walking. And within a couple of weeks, his leg was fine. It was just stress,
So something so physical, it can literally come out.
Absolutely.
In something really as extremely physical as that. That's really
having difficulty walking because or you can have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, the constipated or the sudden and urgent type. It comes out in all kinds of ways. You have that feeling in your gut, that uncomfortable churning feeling in your gut, right? One of the things that happens, right? So when you're telling yourself so many negative things, when you keep bumping into the world and you're reacting negatively to whatever's busy happening to you, you go from rest and digest nervous system into stress and into fight and flight, right? As your stress bucket gets fuller. And where was I going with that? Yes. So when we're nice and relaxed, there's plenty of energy to go around everywhere and your whole body is balanced and working properly. But the more stressed you get, the more adrenaline, cortisol you have in your body, the more your body starts to sense danger. And it starts to repurpose energy to your arms and your legs, your muscles. Mm-hmm. And it will borrow energy from your memory, from your immune system, from your digestion. So the fuller the stress bucket gets, the more you're lending energy away from crucial things to your arms and your legs. And today's danger is not what the danger used to be out in the bush and, in the cave and whatever. Today's danger is different. It's social media. It's the bank balance. It's the property. It's the HMOs. It's all the stuff. And our body still responds by charging our muscles to the detriment of something really important. And we're designed to, in short bursts, get us a little squirt of adrenaline, charge up those muscles, escape danger, and then when the danger's passed, your energy returns back to where it should be. We're designed to do that in short bursts, but these days we tend to get to the stress place, so we stay there longer than we're designed to do, and it gets chronic. And that's when we get our physical symptoms. That's when you get your IBS, where your bowels are lending so much of their energy to the muscles that the peristalsis doesn't work properly and you're constipated, or you've got pains, or, in some cases it's so serious that your body senses so much adrenaline and cortisol, senses danger. It says, what, we got to quickly relieve the whole system. Let's flush everything, make the body lighter, because we might have to run, we might have to defend ourselves. So stress pops up physically in all sorts of ways. And if you have an awareness of how you're feeling, if you're rapid, then you can, that's the first point, to kind of note what's going on. And then you can, from there, you can decide, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
But awareness is the start of everything, really. Otherwise, we just pile more and more and more on.
Yeah, I think it's really, yeah. One of the things that I know is I don't really dream, but actually I kind of know that I'm stressed before I'm aware, because I start dreaming. It's kind of been one of those things where I think you're in a lighter sleep, is it, that you remember your dreams, but I'll suddenly start dreaming. And now because it's happened, a fair amount over the years, I'll suddenly go, oh, what am I sort of stressing about at the moment? And for me, it's the things that I feel most stressful about, and even not just in business, but also emotionally, is when I feel out of control. So, and I think kids can really help with that one, because you want the right thing for them, and then they might kick back or they might do whatever, and it's not something that you can necessarily control. We're so used to being into control, especially when they're tiny. You really can control them, basically, can't you? You can lift them up and protect them and put them in a different place, or dress them in a hat or whatever. So that's really interesting. And in fact, going back to what you said from a female perspective, it was brought to my attention, a number of years ago now, that the stresses that I'd experienced really affected my hormones. So that is quite a huge thing from a female's perspective as well. And that can have some, far-reaching effects. Like years and years ago, overnight on one occasion, I just stopped having periods for months and months on end. And that's a very strange thing, and it was, we went and did all the tests, and, it was a hormonal imbalance, and it was down to, high levels of cortisol, which is, your stress and things like that. So, even if it's not so obvious, it can come out, as you said, in so many different ways, and it's kind of being aware of that. So what I'm really sort of keen to move on to now is the thing that just literally blew my mind when I got into the property world. It just was more acceptable to talk about self-development. There's self-development outside of property world, but in the property world, it's like being in the top class, when you were allowed to talk about how you wanted to do well in life. And it's the same, where suddenly you really can speak very freely and openly. And it was where I first understood this difference between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. So I'd logically, for years and years, been reading self-help books, been doing this, that, and the other, but been so confused as to why the results I was getting were not the results that I wanted. And then that's when I started to sort of understand the subconscious. Would you be able to sort of explain that, just in case, anyone's uncertain about that?
Yeah. So that's interesting. You talk about the results that you want. Now, if you're not aware that there is a difference between your intellectual mind and your subconscious mind, you just think, well, I've got a brain that does some thinking. The reality is your intellectual mind is only responsible for about 5% of what you do. You're only aware of about 5% of what you do. 95% of what you do is subconscious. So you can think of it like this. You've got computer programs installed in your conscious mind, and you've got programs installed in your subconscious mind. So some of these cognitive things, you'll run them from your intellectual mind and you're aware of them. But if you have a habit, a routine, a behavior, a fear, a phobia, a pattern installed in your subconscious mind, you're not aware of it, you just do. The world happens, you think, you feel, and it triggers a behavior, a routine, a pattern. So the world happens, you think, you feel, you respond. So now you're responding either intellectually, you're aware of it, you're in control of that, or you just trigger a program that runs. And so this is where you get your results from, right? So sportsmen call it a flow state. If you've practiced and you know what you're doing, you're doing without thinking, and then you're operating perfectly. Your conscious mind is not getting in the way. So once we know there's intellectual mind, conscious mind, and then if you know there's other little thing, there's a slight dormant between two, which prevents or filters the flow of information from your intellectual mind to your conscious mind. It's called the critical faculty, like the dormant of the brain. So when you're learning something, your brain's job, your intellectual mind's job is to, as soon as you know something, as soon as you've learned something, it passes it down into your subconscious to free up intellectual space again. But this dormant needs to step aside to allow that information through. And in certain states, that dormant will step aside more than others. In other times, and with certain personality types, the door will be pretty closely shut and struggle for information to pass by. So a lot of people get everything they do from their intellectual mind because they struggle to get to the subconscious mind. Other people, as soon as they've learned something, it slips down and then they're just doing stuff automatically. So the results you want can come from one of those two places or both.
So what can we do? So I always think of the subconscious as kind of that kind of reaction on an extreme level. Something happens and you'll have that, you might, I don't know, be driving down the road and you might swear at somebody who cuts in front of you. It's not really that necessary. They may have been a bit rude, but you can just go, they're clearly in a hurry. So I've always, with my kids, tried to reframe that and say something like, gosh, I hope they're okay. They might be on the way to see their wife giving birth, or it might be the last chance for them to say goodbye to their parent, or really try and reframe it, because we've all cut people up at some stages. But it's kind of like that response, isn't it, that it seems almost like we can't control, and it's almost like it's a natural path that we have to take.
So let's come back to this awareness thing quickly, because here's another thing to be aware of, and you'll see how it's relevant now. Every single time we respond to the world, two signals shoot through the brain. There's one signal goes straight to the amygdala, straight to the fight, flight, freeze zone, right? And it turns the stress tap on, and you're automatically responding to that driver that cut you up. It happens in a split second. The other signal goes a little bit slower, and it goes through your conscious intelligence, through the whole library, and it compares everything you know about the situation, and it ends up at the same place, the fight and flight. And then it decides, okay, that stress tap that's on, leave it running because it should run, or you know what, didn't quite need to react like that, we can turn that stress tap off. But every single time the world happens to us, two signals go through the brain, and we often find ourselves reacting, doing without thinking, and then a moment later, we catch up with ourselves.
How can we slow that down then? How can we get that together?
So, absolutely. So when you're in your rest and digest nervous system, when you've got low amount of stress, adrenaline, cortisol in your body, you're in a nervous system that actually runs slower. The more stress you have, you switch over into the fight and flight nervous system, and everything happens faster. So the fuller your stress bucket, the more prone you are to responding negatively instantly in a way that normally you regret and have to come back and fix. But when you're nice and chilled, it's rare that happens. So that's how you can kind of have control, is manage your stress levels in the first place.
Oh, of course. So when you're in a position where you can just let things flow and let it be, whereas, as you were saying, when you have these stress levels, which you do, because I know I've got triggers, especially with the kids, they'll certain things and I'll suddenly react, and I just think that's like I'm really reacting extremely. Whereas,
yes,
most of the time I'll be fine. I'm quite, I need to be really wound up to have a reaction like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
It's worth pointing out something quickly. There's, we've got our stress bucket, and when the bucket's full, we're reacting a little bit quicker and more negatively to what we do because we're thinking there's danger everywhere. But then when we talk about triggers, sometimes we have a trigger for something that will trip you up in a split second. It will overflow your bucket in a split second, and it will always catch you in exactly the same way, as if you've got no control over it. So there's one thing slowly filling your bucket till it overflows. And then there's the other thing, you've got like a light switch. One is like a boiling kettle. Life happens. You get to a point. The other one is you've got this instant thing. And that can be looked at separately, because they are isolated from each other. You know, the boiling kettle, you've got control over that. But if you have a trigger that trips you up and lands you on your butt when you didn't see this thing coming, and it's always the same, that's something we can look at separately and remove that. Because when the world happens to you, you think, you feel. It's the minute you feel, what your body does is it goes through your memories. And it says, it does a pattern match. It says, is there a memory somewhere that looks and feels like this thing I'm experiencing? And then if it finds something or even similar to what you're experiencing, it triggers that behavior without thinking, because there is no conscious intelligence in the subconscious mind. It just reacts mechanically to stuff. So sometimes when we have a trigger, you think, you feel, fetches a memory, reads that memory like an instruction. And when there's emotion on that memory, that's the bit that leaves you on your butt and you didn't see it coming. So we can go there and remove that emotion, leave the memory there, but just remove the emotion. So next time you're triggered to find the same thing, just a memory, no emotion.
So with people, so generally it may be, and it quite often is, that you'll have people that, you know, have got their jobs, they've done a course now in property, and now they're choosing to do the same things. But it seems to be that they start going down what would seemingly be the same old routes and maybe not making it. Now, there are certain people that come in and boom, they just get on and they make it. And then there are these others that, you know, constantly have this kind of repetition. It's almost like the same results, you know, but in a just a different sort of scenario. So just going back into sort of what you do in, you know, in helping people, how can they sort of, you know, start to work through this? I'm sure there must be sort of practical things. You've already spoken about, you know, the people that you're surrounded by. That's really important. Obviously, physically looking after yourself. And I certainly really notice that when if I'm eating not as well as I can, or you're not doing as much exercise, that can really have dramatic effects, can't it? But, you know, at the end of the day, and you've talked about, you know, sort of meditation. And so what kind of, you know, practical tips are there? And then, you know, obviously you do stuff even deeper.
So there's so much that you can do cognitively in your intellectual mind, and there's stuff you at home can do with your subconscious mind, right? So the practical cognitive tools you could use, you can exercise, you can meditate, you know, so that'll go to the other one. You can exercise, you can spend time with people that you like, love, and trust. You can journal, you can have a daily routine, you can listen to music, whatever makes you feel good. You know, if you're aware of how you're feeling, and you know what makes you feel good, you can introduce more of whatever that thing is that makes you feel good. You know, sometimes spending time with some people makes you worse, not better. It's got to be someone that you like, love, and trust, the kind of people that recharge your battery and not drain it. So it's not just go spend time with people, but know yourself. Spend time with things that do it for you, that work well. But now, on a slightly deeper level, when you're doing repetitive tasks, when you're out for a walk, you know, getting out into nature is just cognitively, it's amazing, right? But actually that repetition, left foot, right foot, out in nature, whenever you're doing anything repetitive, you go into trance. We go into trance naturally without somebody to help us many times a day. Every single human being on earth does this, right? So you might remember a time when you drove somewhere and you don't remember the last two junctions, but you know, you're driving, you clearly passed them. We go into trance when we do anything automatic, anything that, you know, once we've learned to think, it gets passed down there. So when you can go out for a walk, you can use mantras. So mantra's a lovely thing, right? So if you get yourself a little 2 or 3 short sentences that kind of rhyme and they are about resolving an issue that you have, you can install a program into your subconscious mind when you're out for a walk and you've got this little mantra. And one of mine used to be, I can do this, I can do that, I can do anything in between. I can do this, I can do that, I can do anything in between. So, 3 very short sentences and it kind of rhymes. And as you're moving your feet, as you're in this trance state, you're repeating that stuff. Remember that doorman steps aside and allows information to go through. So when you're out for a walk, when you're using repetition, the doorman stepped aside a little, and then cognitively you can install those programs in your subconscious mind. So, mantras are fantastic. Out walking is fantastic. Meditating is fantastic. They all allow, the doorman steps aside with those things. Listening to self-hypnosis recording, but like meditation, does the same thing. And the thing that meditation and listening to a self-hypnosis recording, what those 2 things have in common that's so amazing is they mimic rapid eye movement sleep. A rapid eye movement sleep is the phase of your sleep where adrenaline and cortisol get drained from your body. So you can mimic that. You can hack. You spoke about hacks earlier. You can hack the subconscious mind so easily when you know this stuff, because it doesn't think, it just mechanically does. So yeah, pretty easy to get in there and hack. And the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. Intellectually you do, but subconsciously you don't. So you think something, you feel something. The feeling is what gets responded to. So you mentioned reframing earlier. So one of the things you can do, which is amazing to change your stress levels, is to reframe any negativity. First, be aware of what that negativity is. Is it people, places, things? Is it something specific? You start looking for the silver lining. You can start thinking differently about the thing, and just imagining that an outcome will be different is enough to feel. So if you imagine that, okay, I'm in this, okay, so here's your reality. You've borrowed this whole bunch of money, or you've spent a whole bunch of money on this education of yours for property, right? You've invested a fortune into your first, second, third, fourth property. You got all kinds of stuff happening at work. You got all, you're feeling a little overwhelmed. So that's your reality. That's how you're responding to the world. But if you're aware of this stuff, you can start to reframe some of that stuff. You can start to think differently, so imagine differently. So yes, you've got 4 properties. Yes, you owe the bank a whole bunch of money, right? But you imagine that it's going to be okay. You imagine that, yes, in the future, they'll all be paid. You imagine. So when you imagine something, your intellectual mind allows you to imagine anything because it's not real. It's just an imagination. There's no threat. There's no survival threat that it needs to control. So if you're feeling something, if you imagine something to the point where it feels good, it's feeling good because you've got happy hormones now going, stress taps off, happy taps on, simply by imagining a thing. To imagine the better outcome. Imagine the opposite of everything that's turning you upside down. A lovely practical tool for people to use is to think to themselves, well, what's bugging me? What am I struggling with? Write a little list and then draw another column next to that and think, well, what is the opposite of this thing? What is the opposite? So in other words, what do I want? So there's risk and threat with this investment. Well, the opposite of that might be, this is going to be paid off in a few years' time. So for everything that's stressing you, if you find the exact opposite, the thing that you do want, the silver lining, you write those down, then you cross out the original list, and then you spend 5 minutes every morning or a couple of times a day or every time you're on the loo or whatever. You spend a few minutes thinking about the things that you do want. So you've reprogrammed your focus. And now everything that was bugging you, you're thinking about the silver lining instead. So you get different hormones, you get supporting hormones. You turn the stress taps off, and now you turn on the dopamine and the serotonin and the oxytocin, all the lovely stuff.
Wow.
Same, just because you've got an awareness, you can do the stuff, and it's a game changer.
Jake, that's absolutely amazing. And I think just such music to my ears, because these were the things that were really huge for me. And I didn't even realize that you could do that. And I've done these things where you write all the terrible things on one, not terrible things, but all the things, as you say, that are an issue, or you're not getting the results that you want. And then you write the complete opposite, because there's always an opposite. There's always an up and a down. There's always an in and an out. There's always a left and a right. There's always something opposite. And one of the things that I used to do is go and burn that piece of paper with all the bad stuff. I mean, not that it's just going to go, but it felt like a symbolic thing. I quite enjoyed it. I remember my husband looking out the window going, what on earth are you doing? but yes, I love that. And then also this whole imagination, I call it imagined reality, because that's inherently what it is. And it's also what I believe to be faith as well. Now, whether you need to have faith in a religion or whether you need to have faith in the universe, it is inherently having the faith that it will be okay, or it can be okay, or there is a solution. And what I find really incredible is when people come to me and they don't have a goal. And there's no goal, and it's kind of like, what do you want? And there's a lot of kind of like, oh, I want to be financially stable, or I want to leave my job and have 10 properties. And it's kind of like, and I say to them, well, what does that look like? And they'll kind of look a bit confused, and it's like, well, what does that look like? I'll have money, I'll have enough. Well, how much money do you need? So then you start getting down to the nitty gritty, and let's say most people come up with this figment figure of 10 grand. I need 10 grand. It always seems to be the same. So you say, okay, so you wake up tomorrow morning and you've got £10,000 coming into your bank account every day from, let's say, a fairly, you're in charge of your business, but it's not passive, but it's not that challenging. What will your life look like? And they're a bit like, well, I said, what will you do when you open your eyes? What will you do? And, and everyone has different things, don't they? So some people are going to spend the day with their kids. Others are going to get their dog and go for a walk. Others are going to get on a flight and go somewhere. And then it's always kind of like, well, how does that make you feel? So for me, just talking about it, as I've got this excitement in my stomach. I'm just like, oh, wow, this, I'm just imagining my house, my amazing house. I'm imagining the kids not arguing, all of these kind of things. And then it's kind of like, well, you got to live in that, exactly like you've been saying. The more you live in this kind of imagined reality, the more that your whole body, your brain will focus on finding those solutions. And I never really understood sort of serendipity. But to me, this whole, when you live in that, when you have this, non-failing belief that it's going to get there, things just seem to happen, don't they? And I think it's because you're more open to it. When you're kind of stressed and you're closed, and you're angry or you're upset at the world, or you're totally close to this. But I do genuinely believe that opportunities are thrown at people constantly. But we're all completely close to them.
I had a client once who got obsessed with this car in a showroom, and every time she went past this car, she'd stop, she'd look at this thing, and this car was just in her head all day long. And one day she's on Facebook and she's scrolling through, and a raffle ticket for that car pops up, and she stops and she buys that raffle ticket. A month later, she wins it. So, you can't decide whether you're going to win the lottery or not. But the thing for her that made the difference was because it was on her mind, because she had that awareness when the opportunity popped up, she saw it. Opportunities pop up in front of us all the time. But if it's not forefront on your mind, you're going to see this thing as you're not going to see it. It's going to go straight past you. But this imagined reality, when you imagine that reality, right, you say to people, what does it look like? What does that future look like? What does that preferred state look like? What does that thing that you want look like? And the reason we're asking them that is because we want to get them to a feeling place, which is where you start thinking and you get that lovely feeling. That feeling is happy hormones busy flowing into your body. Stress tap off, happy tap on, like in an instant. You do it with your thoughts, turn on those hormones. So when you're imagining what that would look like, if you get that person now to feel what it will feel like. So they have their goal, right? So you can't get anywhere unless you know where you're going. So you have a goal. And that goal is just a goal until you know why you want that goal. You know, you've got to know your why. Simon Sinek does a lovely thing about why, but you got to know your why. So once you know your why, now you have your motivation for doing that thing. So very often when I work with people that are stuck, we say, well, give me everything that's on your mind, right? And you get this, it's very easy for people to write all the negative things down, like they just rattle them off. And then we pause and we find, okay, what's the silver lining or what's the opposite for each of these things? And you cross out this one and you got this one. Now you take another step, you write another column and you say, why? What's my why for every single one of these? Why do I want this thing? And, you know, if it's broad, you mentioned people that are quite broad, I make them get specific. You know, not just enough money, but make it £8 million or make it, you know, be specific. And then why? So you know what you want, you know why you want that thing, then it's really easy to do what you can do so easily is imagine you've got it. And then the feeling comes. And that feeling is all the supporting hormones you need to spur you into action in that direction.
I love that. And the why one, I've been on a sort of a property weekend away, and one of the things we did was the 6 times of why. Okay. So you know, you keep asking. So you say, you know, what do you want to achieve? And it's kind of like, I want financial freedom. Why? And then you say, and you keep asking it, and then it basically, because inherently, don't we all say, I want it for my kids or my family, but
it's a freedom.
Yeah, it comes down to something very sort of deep within us.
The more specific you can get, and the more you can pin it down to that thing, you know, the minute you've got there, it becomes subconscious, right? It just happens because you know why, and your body will just give you what you need to help you achieve that.
But with that subconscious, so what, you know, I've really found that certainly I think emotional people, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is a lot easier for them to tap into their subconscious and make those changes. Whereas for logical people, and I certainly find that for myself, I'm extremely logical, that all of this kind of stuff is, and so therefore I see when other people, it's quite quick for them. For me, I feel it's a much more labored point. And that's why I was really interesting in the work that you do, because obviously you touch on, have already touched on so many things that we can practically do, but you take it one step further and you actually touch on you've spoken about going into trances, but you also work on hypnosis as well. Tell us a bit more about that. I mean, I once went and had hypnosis to give up smoking years ago. It didn't really work very well for me, and I wondered whether it was because I was too logically minded. But you know, immediately it seems that, if I'm correct in thinking, that hypnosis is able to cross that barrier, is able to open that dormant that you were talking about.
Absolutely. So, you know, every single one of us goes into trance, subconscious access, many times a day, automatically. Doesn't matter whether you're creative or you're super analytical, right? Every single person goes there naturally. And that all hypnosis really is the process of getting that dormant to step aside just a little bit, not completely, just a little bit, to allow flow of information from the intellectual mind to the subconscious and back up, right? Now, some people will find it easier to get the dormant to step aside a little. Very creative people, artistic people, emotional people. The dormant steps aside easily. You don't have to do much convincing, and the dormant steps aside and lets you into the club, right? But your more analytical person, your bookkeepers, your accountants, your finance people, you know, I don't want to tie everyone with the same brush, but generally, they have a little more difficulty getting the critical factor to step aside a little. because they're thinking this through and find it hard to just let it happen. So the work that I do is it gets tweaked for your different personality types, but essentially all we're doing is we're getting the critical faculty to step aside a little bit so that that thing can happen.
Wow. And is it, is it kind of just the normal pattern? So what does your kind of work look like? So if we were to say, gosh, I really am becoming more and more aware of my stress levels. I've taken on all of this with my property business, or whether I'm at the beginning or whether I'm quite far down the line, it may be that, a development has been delayed and I'm now, financially, I'm really concerned, and from what you've said, I'm starting to be aware that I'm not making correct decisions. I may be finding it hard to do those things. What is it that you can help and you offer with? What does it practically look like coming to you?
So the difference between hypnotherapy and other therapies is hypnotherapy is just hypnosis, so trance, plus therapy. We put the two together. So we get the doorman to step aside and we go down and do the therapeutic stuff in the subconscious part of the brain. We go and find those programs and we reinstall programs. So typically, for most people, they sign up for my 8-week program and we have an initial consultation and we set the goals, we establish what it is that we want to work on. Is there a lot of imposter syndrome, or, what is there? And then we'll tailor over an 8-week period. And every single session when you come, we're working on something specific. Half the session, we're dealing with the 5% of your brain, the conscious part, and we're giving you tools and tips and techniques, and you're going out into the world, you're applying them, you're coming back, you're reporting back, we're tweaking. First half of the session, we deal with the 5%. The second half of the session is where we count you down from 1 to 10, and you go down the steps, and very quickly you just kind of look like you're sleeping, right? You're just not there. You're not aware. So first half of the session, consciously dealing with the cognitive part. The second half of the session, we're doing the trance. We guide you to that place where you go do the magic for yourself. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis, and not a lot of people know that or like to admit that because they like the power and the control. But in reality, I can't even hypnotize you, right? But I'm a really, really good guide. I act as your sat nav, but you will have to drive the car. So I will guide you to do it to yourself. And if you are a little more analytical or a little bit more resistant, it's not to say you can't be hypnotized, just means you've got to do it a little bit differently to get you to go into that place and do the change work for yourself. That's why it works on Zoom, because I'm not doing it to you, you're doing it to you.
Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? You would never imagine that you could do that across that kind of scenario.
It works really, really nicely. For a lot of people, they turn up more relaxed when it's on Zoom because they're in their home environment. They haven't had traffic. They haven't turned up at a stranger's house. They haven't had to worry about what they're wearing and, all this stuff. So for a lot of people, they turn up more relaxed and easier able to get into that state than having to, fight through all the stresses of the world to get here.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds incredibly interesting. So just as it's been really, really interesting. I've written so many notes for myself because I love all of this. I love all this kind of the way our mind works. And in fact, I come from a scientific background, but I'm less interested in the physical structure of the brain. And I have always just loved this kind of description of having, exactly as you said, your thinking mind almost kind of at the top, your thoughts, your feelings and emotions kind of in this subconscious mind, and then your body kind of takes action as a result of those. And as those kind of flow round, they can flow up, they can flow down, they can flow around depending on whether things have happened that are good or bad. And I found all that really incredible. So it sounds like with you, the kind of beginning of your sessions is prepping, finding out what perhaps the issues are and what needs to be addressed. And then the second half, that's where you're able to go in aid with the sort of the hypnotherapy side?
The very first consultation, the initial consultation, is where we drive out what your goals and wishes and dreams and hopes are and what it is that you want to achieve. But then in every single session, it's directed specifically to different parts of that, first cognitively, then subconsciously. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Wow, that has been tremendous. I really enjoyed that. That was really good. And you are just a starter. Not only did you get the tech all correct as well, it's been absolutely fantastic. Well, look, as I say, this will be, well, it is actually currently live on YouTube, but this will be up properly on YouTube under Emma Howitt Pure Abodes. And then we also break it down into sort of shorter videos of kind of 10 minutes touching on what we've done, and then we make it into much shorter ones so people can really kind of pick and choose and actually pick bits out that might be of use to them. So yeah, guys, please do follow that, and I will be back again next week. I have got some fantastic property marketing gurus coming on, so get savvy. The fantastic Anna is coming on to join us, so that's next week. But Jake, I would really appreciate it if you could give us, you know, just something kind of closing that people can kind of go away with. I've put your link to your website, so if anyone wants to come and find you, then absolutely they can. I know a lot of people have massively benefited from you, and I know this is how I always like to do these interviews, to find out about things that I'm genuinely very interested in. So I know when we met at a big conference and you stood up, I was immediately like, yeah, I really want to go and talk to Jake, and that's how this has all come about. So yeah, anything that you would just like to kind of close the session with, please.
So I guess it would be if something that I didn't know and wish I did know. So if you're behaving in a way that's strange and odd and unusual to you, look to how you're feeling. Look to your stress levels first and take steps to address your stress. Once you've taken those steps to address your stress, then you can take another look. You know, you've leveled the playing field, then you can look and say, well, what's left? Is there anything left? Usually there's nothing, because by then you've resolved whatever that was. And you mentioned short videos, right? So I've got a YouTube channel as well. And on LinkedIn, I chuck 3 short videos, less than 5 minutes every week, 3 videos out. And I keep them all on my YouTube channel. So if you're feeling less than the way you should be, or you're behaving in a strange way at all, feeling at odds, go to my YouTube channel, or just to my website, which will lead you there. And there's loads of videos there. They're all clearly marked. You know, go find the one that resonates with you, watch it. And for a lot of you, you'll find something that you can do and apply at home and make a difference by yourself.
I love it. I love it. So guys, the link is here on Clubhouse. We'll put the link on YouTube, and we will be sharing that out as well. Jake, really appreciate it. I know you weren't feeling 100%. You had a bit of a cold, but we really appreciate you coming on here and joining us. And yes, much appreciated. So we've had, John has said, great session, Emma and Jake, many thanks. So yeah, again, a special thanks from myself. So yeah, take care and thank you so much.